Welcome back, folks. Let's pick up the thread from where we left off last time. We were looking at the verse number 21. Veda vinashinam nityam ya enam ajamavyayam katham sapurusha partha kanghatayati hantikam. Veda is to know, avinash is indestructible. So know that to be indestructible. Veda vinashinam nityam, eternal. Nityam is eternal. Veda vinashinam nityam. Ya enam, this one. Ya enam, ajam, unborn. Avyaya, immutable. Katham sapurusha partha. Kanghatayati hantikam. How is it possible for someone, a person, to kill this indestructible thing? Or how does it kill something else? So we went over this, and the following verses, some of the previous ones were dwelling upon this concept. And the reason for that is this is a very key and important concept that one needs to wrap their head around, because it is really a life-changing principle if one gets it and attempts to follow this principle in life. They say in medicine that sometimes the medicine that is there is a change in your way of life. There is no tablet that you can take. This is a similar thing. There, this is kind of a medicine, if you will, for the mind. Okay, so we had covered this verse last time. It is just for the sake of continuity that I went over it again. So let's look at the next verse. This next verse is see in the Bhagwad Gita. We went over the verse 16, which we said that it is the most profound words in the Bhagavad Gita from the Advaita Vedanta standpoint, because of the core concept that it was talking about. However, it is not the most popular one. There are a couple of popular ones. So the one that is probably the most popular is Karmanye Vadhikaraste Ma Phaleshu Kadachana Ma Karma Phala Hetur Bhuhu Ma Te Sangostva Karmani Yogastham, and so on and so forth. But in terms of the words, Karmanye Vadhikaraste, this particular verse also happens to occur in this chapter only. So in terms of popularity, that is very popular. And then the next one that is popular and gets mentioned quite often is this one that we are going to see, the verse number 22. And then there is another one that is also quite popular, that also gets referenced in a different context. Yada yada hi dharmasya. You might have heard this being sung around or recited in on special occasions, on events. And there is a lot of meaning behind it, but the way you take the meaning, it kind of shades whatever event that is it's being sung at in a different color. We'll see that it's not part of this chapter, but when we get to that chapter. So let's look at this verse. Um, in terms of it's one of the most popular verses of the Bhagavad Gita. And I in the initial background, there are two kinds of backgrounds that we went over: the story specific or perspective background, and then the philosophical context background that was necessary or is necessary to appreciate the concepts that are discussed in Bhagwad Gita. And one of them is the theory of reincarnation. And we have said, and we will reiterate that now, that you don't necessarily have to believe it in exactly the way it is said. There is no harm if you believe in it, but even if you don't, it is not going to affect at all the things that you will take away from this verse. So let's see this verse. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya navani ghrannati naroparani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyapi navani dehi. So what it says is that Vasansi jirna. Vasansi is the clothes that we wear. So I am putting on the shirt. There's wear and tear involved, and so after uh, the passage of time, the shirt it wears out, and what you do is you give it up and you replace it with a new garment. Vasansi, which is the garment. Jirnani. Jirna is where it withers out, gets worn out. Vasansi jirnani yatha. Yatha is it's part of the simile that gets used in Sanskrit. Yatha tatha. It's as like, then that context it gets used. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya. Give up. Just like you give up worn out clothes, navani, and take up new. Nava is new. Navani grinnati naroparani. Naroparani is nara is person. So just like a person gives up his old worn out clothes and takes on new garments, new clothes. Tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani. Like that, just like the we replace the old core clothes with new clothes, like that, just like that, the body too, tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani, the body also gets worn out, and then we give up that body, or the body gets given up, would be a better way to put it. Tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyapi navani dehi. The soul, if I can use that word, it takes up a new body. Now, on the face of it, one might get the impression that you need to have faith or belief in this theory of reincarnation. In the theory of reincarnation, the body, or in general a person, a jiva, he commits karma, actions, and then because of the actions that he is executing, these actions, they bear fruit, which is phala, karma phala it's called. And so the result of this action may not be something immediate. It gets accumulated over time. There is kind of a bank of these fruits of your action. They get accumulated, and then the fruits will bear result at some point or another, maybe in this life. And so the thinking that is there here is that the jiva, who is the soul or the thing that is occupying this body, if this body gets destroyed, then it takes on a new body depending on the karma phala that have been accumulated for this specific being identity. Let's not get into that because it can get into a controversial topic. But there are some other very obvious things that one can take away. So in terms of the identity that one has, if when a person says that I do something or he does something, his implied identity is that with the body. And in science, there is been a thorough analysis of how a matter is decomposed or can be decomposed into its constituent elements. And so also has it been done with the body. And in from a medical scientific standpoint, we have got this external body with the different organs that are there. And then we have got its counterpart. We have got this nervous system, which carries this information that the senses collect. And then it is funneled, or there's some kind of a conduit mechanism through these nerves to some intelligence where actual perception and conception takes place. And then that is how experience is generated, and one interacts with the world. So this these layers, the external body, this subtle the nervous system, which helps in communicating this external world with the internal intelligence. The way modern science puts it, the rishis of olden time, they had their own way of um, classifying this, and it's not at all something very out of the world and something that one needs to stretch their imagination. It's very logical. So there are the rishis, they dissected or they analyzed the body to be made up of three sheaths, if you will. That is then external body, which is called sthula sharira, and then there is the sukshma sharira, which is nothing but can be comparable to the nervous system along with the intelligence of interpreting that. And then there is the third one, which is the karana sharira, for which there is no good equivalent in science, because it is more related to the intelligence and conscious portion of the human being. So there are three distinct aspects to it. And depending on how the things go, I might delve into more details, because this is a very vast topic, and it will take a lot of time if we delve into the exact functioning of this. And the mechanics involved, they are pretty technical between these three layers that are there of the body. And then this technical analysis, it involves both the current state of how a body interacts with the external world and the mechanics of what happens after the death of a body, and then how this technically this transfer of ownership of things take place. And that is the point of that could be a potential point of controversy, and we don't want to get into that, at least not as of right now. If someone is interested specifically in that topic, maybe at some point we can go over that. But the thing is, wherever there is no concrete distinct proof available, we are trying to deviate or digress from that portion of the matter that we are discussing. So the obvious things are that when a child is born and it grows up, it becomes a child, a toddler, and then it becomes an adult. It is a known thing that the body is constantly undergoing change. So there is nothing out of the world that is being said over here. Tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani. So this change of this body, change is equal to death in terms of the Vedantic principles. If there is change, there is death. Now, in terms of the actual death of the body, we have seen previously that there are definitely at a broad level two things that make up a human being. There is the body that is made up of different kinds of material. So there is a fabric of existence which is constructed by different atoms, molecules. You can go on, and we have done that analysis before. And it comes down to a point where it is just energy, the way energy holds together the atomic structure. Because if that structure itself falls apart, then everything, all the edifice that stands on top of this, the whole thing, the structure will collapse. So there is this energy, and one needs to be aware that it's unlike we go and we need to decipher matter, and we need to peel the onion, if I can use that term, and keep digging inside and going in till we reach the point where we see this energy that is holding the atoms together. It is not necessary for us to go to that extent to appreciate the fact that it is this energy that is holding all matter together. It is in and through everything that we experience. That energy is there everywhere. It is just that when we go at that microscopic level, even there we really cannot see it. But not to get too much into the physical aspect of it. So there is the physical aspect where we go down to this level where we encounter energy. And then there is the sentient aspect of it, where that too is being analyzed to it's so marvelous, the degree of analysis that the rishis have done of how you can break up this sentient part of a human being. And so they too have done this analysis, and they reach a point beyond which you cannot go. And therefore, just like it is not possible for us to eliminate the body, it is not possible to eliminate the sentient, the fabric, that the the fabric with which this shirt is worn. We cannot eliminate it. It just keeps going on down to its more basic elements. So the the transformation that is taking place in the physical body, that transformation is, one can apply that same logic to the sentient part of it, of a human being, and come down to the point where things are unchangeable. So tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyapi navani dehi. Here, if we look at the theory of reincarnation, then after the death of the body, a new the jiva is a very complicated term. We don't have to get into it right now. If occasion comes up and time permits, we'll get into it. It's a composite identity of different things, but we can compare it to some living being. So at the time of death, this body will die, and then the thinking that is being said over here, or one of the things, is that the soul then takes on a new body. Doesn't necessarily have to be a human being. It can be anything else. We don't have to go there. Even in the life that we lead, we can see this happening. The body is constantly undergoing change. And so the soul is something that is not changing, that sits or is backing this body. And that is where this verse becomes quite important, that one, when identifies oneself with the body, then this perception becomes an issue. So we say that when I die, when someone dies, Vedanta is going to pose a question: what exactly it is dying? They have said that body is made up of three bodies: the Sthula, Sukshma, and Karana. So when we say that a body dies, what exactly it is that is dying? Which part of the body is dying? And because they can pose this question, this particular verse, it takes on a different meaning. Scientifically, we might find it difficult to ask this question. When the body dies, consciousness is lost. That's something that has been living. This body is gone. And so science kind of stops there. But still, we have seen that the consciousness which had been enlivening this body has got to be existing in some form or the others, because it returns back to the core constituent elements from which it was constructed when it used to be in this body. How that happens, details about that we'll see later. It's pretty convincing. You will be very surprised if you don't already know how much of thinking has gone behind this process and what the rishis have found out. There will be some aspects of it which you might dismiss, which is fine, but some aspects you will be very pleasantly amazed that they have done this work. Okay, let's move on to the next verse. As I said, this verse is very popular, just something to keep in mind. Okay, so this next verse, Nainam chindanti shastrani, Nainam dahati pavakaha, Nachainam kledayantyapa, Nashoshayati marutaha. All these verses from 16, 17 verse onwards, they are so drenched deep in Vedantic principles and concepts. And when one is studying this, you might think that this same concept is being mentioned in different ways, and that why is this redundancy there? So there is a very important reason behind that. It's worth mentioning there is a Upanishad that is called as the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Brihat is big, so it is probably the biggest Upanishad that there is. There are out of the Vedantic Upanishads, out of the ones that support the Vedantic principles. In that Upanishad, just as a matter of academic information, there is a pretty big chapter that is there that is discussing some Vedantic concepts, and it is repeated verbatim uh, in after following a few chapters. There comes a time when it is as is repeated. Same thing is happening here also. There are some verses that 8-10 verses that we see here, they're kind of talking about the same concepts. It's being revealed, that the truth is being revealed in different perspectives. So there's a reason for that. Shankara in his commentary also has mentioned it in a place. Actually, I think in Brihadaranyaka he mentions it. So, and I don't want to go on with this for too long, but to make a point that when the rishis, these spiritual scientists, they analyzed and studied the brain to, or the mind or the psyche of the person, they went to such extensive degrees that regular average human being, it's very difficult to get to it. And plus for generations they kept studying, so they picked up from where the previous generation left off. So they were able to reach pretty lofty heights, and it takes a lot of time for one to understand what is being spoken. But in their analysis, they were able to see, which is not a very surprising or uncommon understanding that they came to, that it's very difficult to control the mind. In a later chapter, in chapter 6, you'll see specifically Arjuna talking about this. So the way that you want to, if you want to understand a particular topic, you want to focus your mind on it. That is a given. That is kind of a very basic thing, preliminary thing. And so they came up with several techniques for one to be able to focus the mind on a specific topic. Now, if you pick the right topic, then you are making good use of your mind. If you don't, then obviously you're not making such a good use, and that's again a different topic. But so these verses that are there, they allow you, if one by hearts them, in fact, like I said, the second chapter that is there, they are a tool, a technique that one can use in order to have the mind focused on these complex and lofty thoughts. If you read just two verses and you begin to contemplate, it is the very nature of the mind to jump about, go here and there. It takes one word, dahati, which means dahan, which means to burn, and it might take that topic and jump from somewhere there, okay, what is being burnt, and then sandalwood is being burnt. Where is sandalwood? So yeah, we know that, how the mind jumps from one place to another. So the reason of this repetition, one of the reasons is that one can use this as a tool to focus and understand, to focus and be able to appreciate what is the subject at hand is very complicated, very complex, and it's not just a intellectual affair. If it were pure intellectual gymnastics, then it would be a pretty futile exercise that we are doing. But the proficiency that these rishis had is marvelous, is unthinkable, the kind of things that, and so they were able to see this, foresee this problem, and therefore you will find this repetition of things taking place. Okay. Nainam Chindanti is basically to use a weapon and on something to hurt that. So you can, Chindanti is to pierce or to cut. Naina is no. Nainam Chindanti Shastrani. No weapons can hurt it. Nainam Chindanti Shastrani. Nainam Dahati Pavakaha. Dahati Pavakaha. Weapons cannot hurt it. Fire cannot burn it. Dahati is to burn. So Pavaka is fire. Fire doesn't burn it. Weapons don't harm it. Nachainam Kledayantyapaha. Apa is water. Kleda is to wet. Water cannot wet it. Nashoshayati Marutaha. And the wind cannot dry it. Maruta is wind. You might know in Ramayana, the son of Maruti is this the monkey god that is there with Rama. He is the son of the god of wind, Maruta. That's why he's called Maruti. We have seen this being used several places, Bharata, Kaunte, Radhe, similarly here. So Maruta is wind. So the wind cannot dry it. Him no weapon can harm, nor fire burn, nor water wet, nor wind dry. That is what this verse is saying. So what is the significance of this? So the significance of this is pretty immense. The finding that is there here is that we human beings, the way we live and experience this world, this experience that takes place is essentially a very personal affair. And really, it all takes, for lack of a better word, I will say the mind, but it's very complicated how experience takes place. And it is the kind of analysis that rishis have done and commentaries that Shankara has written on this as to what experience is so mind-boggling and fantastic. I'm not using the word fantastic from a fantasy style. It is a wonderful work that they have done. That when you look at it, you are just amazed that they have done thinking in such a level of detail. So this experience that us human beings or any living being has with the world, the way this experience takes place is in the mind. Experience takes place in the mind. And let's keep it simple for now. At some point we will delve into details of what this is, what exactly experience is. But you are if we were to say that can you pour tea into a cup when that cup is moving at 40 miles an hour? It just goes zoom past you. Can you put tea in it or whatever, water in it, and it will sound like a ridiculous proposition. What are you talking about? But we know very well that if you two are moving at the same speed, it will appear stationary to you. So when if somebody is driving in a car in front of us and he is having coffee, that coffee, this is one of Newton's laws, right? That's why when when the car hits a brake, then the body is pushed forward because the body keeps traveling at the speed. Nevertheless, the point is that there are orders of degrees of realization of experience. So if we are in that dimension, if the object that we are experiencing or we are trying to interact with happens to be that object and you, if they happen to be in the same dimension, we can interact with it and we can experience it. What do we mean by that? Now, the body and the mind, let's keep it simple because it's really far more complicated than that, but let's keep it simple. The dimensions that the the body typically interacts with are the physical dimensions. So we can see things, we can feel things. Feel in the sense from a physical standpoint, can touch things. If there is a ball that is there, we can go and push it and the ball will roll. Now, if there is something hot that is there, and if I touch it, then it will burn my finger or I'll feel warm, I'll have a reflex action and my hand gets pulled. But the experience of me getting the fingers of my hand getting burned, that experience is taking place in the mind. The rolling of the ball, that experience is taking place in the mind. But the dimension in which the mind operates is different from the dimension in which the physical body is operating. So if my hand is burnt, my mind is not getting burnt in that sense. The mind, nothing is happening to the mind. When I push the ball and it rolls, the mind is not doing this. It is my hand that is doing that. So the order of reality in which the body and this external world that is there happens to be the same order. So we interact with it. Now, if I ask if I use a knife and when I chop an onion or a tomato with it, it's going to get sliced. But I cannot use the knife on the mind. Why? Because it, it lives and operates in a different dimension. You cannot reach there. On the other hand, if I want the mind to be able to push a ball like I did with my hand, it will not be able to do that for the same reason. Its dimension of operation is different from the dimension of operation of the body. And not to go into too much of detail, but in general, a living being, a human being, if I can narrow down this analysis, his world can be boiled down. This entire life can be boiled down to three different types of experiences: the waking state, the sleep state, and the deep sleep state. That's all that is there. This also is a wonderful analysis that has been done in Vedanta. Everything can be explained. All the human life from birth to death, all is experience. They can be put into these three buckets. You are either waking, you are in sleep, where you see dreams, you interact with dreams, and then there is deep sleep, where there are no dreams. And that's one other complicated area. But there are these three states, and each of these three states, they kind of have their own dimension. So one, it's you leave one dimension and you then come into here, and then you have experiences there, but they don't relate to each other. You might be a pauper in your dream, but when you come into real life, then you are, whoever you are in that life. There are different orders of reality. So this Nainam Chindanti Shastrani, they are in different dimensions. They cannot work with each other. Well, work with each other is not kind of the right way of saying, but at least if I take the simple case of a mind, one can easily appreciate what is being said here. So the weapons cannot hurt it, harm it. Nainam Chindanti Shastrani, Nainam Dahati Pavaka. Fire cannot burn it. And like I said, vice versa, it also cannot operate in this dimension that we experience. But we are a complex combination of all these things, and this is, we just took the example of two dimensions, maybe three. But if one were to analyze it a little bit further, you will easily know that there are several dimensions that are involved. And it starts getting to a point where one might think that it is a fatuous exercise to just keep deciphering the different dimension, which is kind of true, because you can actually aggregate that, which is what Vedanta has done. Vedanta aggregates that. It is just two when it comes to that point. I don't want to get into that. You might be digressing too much. So the mind is kind of unaffected by these external things. If I'm sitting in the car and it starts raining, the car is affected by the rain, not me. I'm sitting inside it. It doesn't affect me. Now, one can easily appreciate this from a mind and from a body discussion or a context. But I want to take this to a further subtle layer. Just like a body is something that is made up of its constituent elements, and we have gone through this many times now, that it is made up of molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms. So now the atoms, they have their own order of reality. So want to work with an atom, then you have to work at a subatomic particle level. You cannot, you can take a ball and you can throw it at me and I can see it and I can play with it. But if you are going to throw an electron at me, I'm not equipped with those kind of senses. It's a different dimension. We get to go to that point and then we can use that. So similar to that, science had made um, such great strides in this analysis, going down to the very core of what matter is, until the point that they have figured out that it is nothing but energy. The Rishis and the Vedantists have done a terrific job at doing the same thing with the mind. So now, just like with the body, you go to the atom, you take the mind, and then you start analyzing the mind. What is it that makes up the mind? And then you come up with something and you call it, material A. Material is really not the right word here because it betrays our notion of being matter. But let's say that material A is what makes up the mind. So now, if what happens to the body doesn't affect the mind, then what happens to the mind doesn't affect material A. And then you do an analysis of material A, and then you come to material B. And then this is another layer of dimension. So what affects material B, material A does not affect material B, and so on and so forth. And when you do this analysis of the mind, you come to a point where you cannot go below that, and you can give it some name. The name that is typically used in Vedanta is called Brahman. Now, it's another word that is called as Atman, but it is a bit tricky because depending on the context that you're talking about, this word can sometimes mean something different, but it's okay as long as we get some idea about what we are talking about. So when we do this constituent analysis of the mind, we come to this point, we reach a point that we cannot go beyond it. And the Vedantists have called it Brahman. So let's stick with that. You can call it with soul, spirit, whatever, but because to avoid confusion, because somebody might have defined it in some other way. So in order to avoid that confusion, we will stick with this Vedantic term that gets used to describe this. So this Brahman, which happens to be the coremost constituent on which this entire edifice stands, this verse is talking about that Brahman, that Atman. It is not talking about the mind. I just took the example so we can relate to it. But now we can see that it is analysis that gets done. The order of reality, the dimension in which Brahman exists, is so profound that it should be not that difficult to appreciate that to experience this coremost state from which mind has evolved will be a very, very hard thing to experience, because it is the very generator of experience. It's difficult to say that you can experience that state. It might sound a little bit abstract, the terminology being used here. Nevertheless, from this verse perspective, that point, the farthermost order of reality that is there, is being referenced here. And it is said, this verse is saying that state is imperishable, untouchable. You cannot do it. Is if it's like, it's a very poor analogy, but it's like space. You what can you do to harm space? What can you do to manipulate space, to condition space, to limit space? We the dimension in which they exist is so huge and enormous, immeasurable. We don't have the tools or techniques to be able to comprehend or affect it. You cannot use weapons with it. You cannot burn it. It's just space. And space is just a very poor analogy of what this Brahman would be. It stands far superior to that. In fact, to be precise, when I say space, when I say object, we cannot imagine. It is not possible for us to think of an object without space. The object exists inside of space. So there is space and there is object. And for us to imagine that space, it needs to exist in its own container, which happens to be a mental space. So that space exists because after all, experience is something that takes place in the mind. And so for us to understand and experience space, we ascend from these different dimensions and we reach that dimension where experience takes place. So there, that farthermost point is something that is unaffected by any of these external things. And external meaning it goes right from the external most thing, if you want to put it like that, like the atoms, electrons, protons, from there to the eyes. So if my eyes were damaged for some reason, they will not affect this Brahman because it is sitting at a very different layer, different level. So the eyes doesn't affect it. If I come one more layer, if my mind is sad or happy, it doesn't affect that. I come one more layer. If the ahankara, the ego, which is basically making us things, do things, if that is affected in any way, even that doesn't affect this, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. Okay, we have just crossed the time that we had. I don't think I can get into the next verse, but the next verse is basically a corollary, if you will, to this verse. I will just recite it so the listeners can get an idea. In the previous verse, we said that the the weapons cannot harm, so on and so forth. And this verse, it says, Achedyoyamadhayoyam akledyoshosha evacha Nitya Achaloyam Sanatanaha. So by the words, even if you do not know that much of Sanskrit, from the previous verse, you can see that the same words are being said here. Achedyoyam, this, that which cannot be destructed by weapons, that which cannot be burned. It's the same thing that is being said before. It's just being used to identify that phenomenon. I cannot even use the word object. So I'm calling it a phenomenon. So that phenomenon is nitya. We will see it next time, but just to finish this verse, nitya sarvagatastha. Nitya sarvagatastanu achaloyam. It's immovable. Sanatana. It is eternally present. Okay. Thanks for listening, and till next time, yeah, have a nice weekend. Thank you. Bye.